Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Organic Healthy Lifestyle, and I'm Nancy Addison, your host. And I always start off my show with a prayer, and I ask you to please join me in whichever way you would like. And today I'm asking our Divine Creator, thank you for all the abundance and for all the gifts of life. We pray that your light and protection and blessing grace each and every one of us who is listening now and who is listening in the future. We ask that peace may reign on earth, and may all here be blessed with perfect health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression. What we may live in peace and harmony and joy on this sacred planet. And I ask this in the highest good of all concerned and thank you. And so it is. And I am so honored to have Meredith Miller on the show today. And she's a holistic coach, author, and speaker. And she's really incredible. And I was introduced to her listening to Reiner Füllmich's grand jury, where she testified about how we've all been traumatized the last few years by media and different types of things that we've been bombarded with by social media or internet or radio or television or all types of things, fear-mongering us. And so Meredith helps people heal after abuse or toxic relationships, and helps people find some purpose after dealing with trauma. And welcome to the show today, Meredith.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about how you came to be a holistic coach for helping people with trauma and different types of communication problems and challenges.
I originally found holistic healing when I got really sick when I was 22 years old. And so I started going down this path of studying all sorts of holistic healing. And at first I was helping people more generally, but then around 2016, I started to home in on this topic of narcissistic abuse, realizing that was basically the story of my life. And I was able to help people through my personal experience and also through my training in holistic healing. And because I was able to study with some shamans and other teachers who taught me a lot about the holistic human being, the body, mind, spirit, the connection of all of that. And then in the last couple years, since 2020, when all of this kicked up in the world, I started studying more and more about trauma so that I could learn more about what's happening in the world and help people heal through this process of the collective and personal traumas that are happening to us.
And when you talk about collective traumas, I'd love for you to share with our listeners what you mean by our collective trauma, especially within the last few years, because I totally zoned in on that and connected with that, because I've had a lot of trauma in my life, and I've been abused by various people throughout my life in really traumatic ways. And so I really connected with your analysis of what has been happening to us worldwide in the last few years.
Yeah, so the collective traumas are that which affects a large amount of people at the same time. And this is probably the largest collective trauma that's ever happened in human history, because all of the countries in the entire world are being affected. Sometimes they're more localized wars, collective traumas that are happening in particular areas or things like this. So what we're dealing with is this massive collective trauma that's happening. It's affecting each of us in personal ways, depending how it's touching our life, depending where we are and what's our life situation. And it's also triggering up to the surface our previously unresolved personal traumas. And that includes the things that have happened to us since childhood. That also includes the ancestral traumas that we've inherited as a burden of our legacy, of the family members that came before us that weren't able to resolve their own traumas. And this got passed forward. And so we're now able to look at what's going on sort of at all of these different levels, from the individual to the ancestral to the collective. And this is really overwhelming. So when we look around the world and we see, now almost 3 years in, there's an epidemic of mental illness that's just starting to bud. I think we haven't even seen the peak of that yet. And I think what that is the unresolved traumas that are coming up. And so this overwhelm, what happens when we get overwhelmed in the moment of trauma, we can't process all of this through the nervous system, which is like an electrical system. It's like when the electrical system in your house gets overloaded and the fuse flips because there's too much in there and it's trying to protect you. Our nervous system tries to protect us by numbing it out. So you also see people doing numbing behaviors like alcoholism and drugs and fantasy and pornography and different things that they are trying to escape the feelings to try to stop it from coming up to the surface. But it's important that we allow the feelings to come up layer by layer so we can process them ongoing, even though this isn't over yet. This may be going on for many more years, but it's going to get more and more built up and more overwhelmed inside of us. So we need to start processing these heavy feelings layer by layer.
So do you have suggestions on how to do that? I mean, it's everything from the trauma of mask wearing, which I have to admit, I was just in Baton Rouge last week and I went into a spa to get a neck and shoulder massage because I had driven 6 hours and I was tired. And there were a couple of people in there that had those masks on. And I keep thinking, are people really still wearing those? And I was actually kind of taken back by one of the ladies who, I mean, I couldn't even tell if she was talking to me or not. She had this big black mask on, and I have to admit, she looked quite horrifying. And at one point, I think she was talking to me, but I had to talk to a person that didn't have a mask on and say, is she talking to me? It's like, you can't hear them. You can't tell that they're talking to you. And I have to admit, I kind of whispered to her a little later. I said, you really look scary in that. And when I was leaving and checking out, she took off her mask and actually talked to me. But I know children are being traumatized from this, and they're actually showing terrible retardation of learning in children because they learn so much by watching some people's faces. And then also, the fact that it's cutting off your oxygen and it causes irreversible brain damage. There's so many different variables in there. And I think there's still places in the world where they're actually still forcing children and people to wear these, I call them satanic masks, because, I mean, if from what I understand, this is what they show subservience to. Whoever it is, they worship Satan or Baal or Moloch or whoever those, evil beings are that they worship. Who I believe a lot of these people who are creating this trauma to us around the world actually do worship these evil beings. And I know that when they do human trafficking, one of the first things they do to people is put a mask on them. And, it dehumanizes you and it takes away your personal beingness. And it's really quite shocking. And so do you have some advice for us worldwide, whatever situation we may be in, on how to handle some of these things that might still be being thrown at us from various medias or components or people who think they're an authority. I'm like, really, what makes them think that they have any authority over me at all? um, but I think we all see it differently, and so I'd love for you to share some action steps or things that people can do or think about in order to handle whatever situation they might be arising in. And then as we are coming into the fall here in North America, we're going into our Thanksgiving and our Christmas season. And I think, as we get together with family members or friends, there's all types of different communication situations that may arise, or people may be just feeling really, really lonely. And so any kind of advice that you feel is pertinent to the time today, I would love for you to share some kind of thoughts you have on how we can handle some of these situations better.
So I love that you mentioned authority, and this is really important that we reclaim our inner authority and sovereignty over our body and consciousness. So we have been under this violation of human rights, the violation of consent, whether it was from the mask all the way to the injections and everything that's happened in between, and the continual process that this is happening in the world. They're going to keep pushing to manufacture and violate our consent through coercion or force. So we need to self-examine. Where is that thought coming from? The thought, I have to put on a mask or something like this, or that I should do this because I'm being told to do this. Where is that thought coming from? Does that thought resonate with my values? Does that thought support my health, my sanity, my well-being? Or is that a detriment to my health, my sanity, and well-being? Where is this coming from? My behaviors, the actions that I take. Is this really the behavior that I want to take, or is this what I'm being told? Why am I being told that? Where is this coming from? This is my responsibility to decide whether I consent to this or not. That's one of our main human rights. And I think the most important thing that we look at around the world is this violation of consent, because that's going to be the theme moving forward and everything else that they try to impose upon us. So we have to be like mental ninjas, examining ourselves with our higher consciousness, observing ourselves, observing our thoughts. Who is it that observes the thoughts? It's this higher part of ourselves, this higher part of our consciousness, a more spiritual aspect of ourselves. Is this in alignment? Is this in integrity with your values? If it is, okay. If it's not, then you need to set a boundary to protect that. Because why? When you're in an abusive relationship, and this is a massive abusive relationship, the abuser will slowly over time degrade your sense of self-worth. They will crush your sense of human dignity. And the only way to rebuild that is to start setting boundaries to protect what matters to you. So part of this might involve some self-forgiveness. If we look back at the last 3 years, maybe you wore a mask for a few months when you were scared, and maybe you need to forgive yourself for that. Looking back, why did I make that decision? Where did I abandon myself? Where did I neglect my own values? Where did I not protect that? Okay, I need to work on forgiving myself for that. And then look at what would I do differently next time? Because that's the empowering piece, so that we don't stay stuck in the self-blame and the regret and the heavy feelings and in that low self-worth. What would I do differently? Because when your mind starts imagining that, it's like when elite athletes train and rehearse in their mind long before they ever get on the field for their performance, they practice and practice it. That's empowering. So when we practice, okay, if that happens again and I walk into a store and someone comes up to me and tell me I have to wear a mask, what am I going to say? How am I going to assert my human rights to breathe, to not wear that mask? Right? So we need to evaluate those things so we can learn from them. Again, not to beat ourselves up for it, but to learn from it so that next time we're stronger, so that we're more solid in our self-worth, protecting our values and setting these boundaries.
Oh, that is such excellent advice. And I remember when I was in therapy after my divorce, my counselor kept telling me, Nancy, you need to develop better boundaries. And I was, been working on that now for 17 years. And I'm still working on it. But I love that you said practice those things, because remember when they first started uh, trying to get people to wear masks, even here in Texas, I was just absolutely horrified that Governor Abbott would sell us out like that. And it really did occur to me each time I approached a store or whatever, and I didn't have my mask on, and I had, I had this lanyard I'd gotten from James Wood, who has this free speech website. I had my freedom of speech little card thing that I could show people that, it's I'm going with my constitutional rights. And I would literally practice how I was going to respond if someone came up to me, which, they frequently did. I had a couple of police officers come up and tell me at times, that I had to leave if I didn't put on a mask. And, I printed out literally the federal court's justice decision that nothing overrides your freedom of religion, your freedom of speech. And I had a freedom of religion lanyard also that said I didn't want to participate in their satanic rituals. And I would practice, and I would print off this information and hand it to the police officer and say, oh, and the Justice Department just rolled on, nothing, not even a pandemic, or I would call it a fake demic, can override, your freedom of religion or something. I'd say, would you like a copy? And it always, each time I did it, I got a little better. And I got escorted out a couple of stores, but frequently they let me go ahead and make my purchase. And they really weren't really mean to me. In fact, at one store, I think it was Whole Foods Market, they told me I had to leave because I wasn't wearing a mask. And the guy secretly whispered to me, he goes, I really believe what you're doing is right. And he's just trying to keep his job. And I think that, frequently is the case. At the Houston Art Museum, they escorted me out of the door, treated me like I was some kind of criminal because I wouldn't wear a mask. And the manager, I kept handing her all my sheets I printed off on mask wearing, on how, this was you're providing medical information. If you're not a licensed medical professional, this is actually unlawful. They could go to jail for this. And I'm handing her all these sheets, and she kept hugging me. It was pretty wild. She was like, thank you. And she asked me if I could email those to her. And I did. I emailed her, like, I don't know how many laws it was that they were violating. And at the very end, I put, and I hope we don't have to do an audit of the Houston Art Museum's board to see if they're taking, bribes for implementing these unlawful and unhealthy regulations on their employees and their patrons. And they ended up closing the Houston Art Museum for me. It was pretty strange going in the art museum all by myself, but I actually went and did it because I thought I needed to actually show up and be there. And I think part of it is, what we tell ourselves is very important. Like what you were saying, when you tell yourself something, it's very important. And owning your rights and owning the fact that you are under God and God is your only authority, really, that, every time I would do this, I would get a little stronger and a little better. And frequently I was thanked for it because the manager or the people there, they don't know how to go against that, and they don't know the laws or what to say. And I could get in the car and I'd be like kind of shaking because, being confronted by people who are questioning what you're doing can be a little bit unnerving. And I would just, keep going at it. But frequently I found more people were grateful for what you did than not. And I think even the police officers were, and I would call them policy enforcers because they don't really enforce law. They just enforce policy that isn't really even lawful. And so anyway, it's just, it is a process, but, as I've talked to people, and I was in Baton Rouge last week, I talked to this woman who decided to take her kids out of public school. And she has 4 under the age of 6. She goes, I thought it would be so hard to have homeschooling and have 4 children at home under the age of 6. She said it's actually been so much easier. What I found surprising, she goes, when my kids were in public school, they would come home and it was such a challenge to get them there on time at these early times that actually aren't on their circadian rhythms. You'd have these time changes, like the fall change just really disrupts children and the whole family dynamics. And she said her kids are not having these explosive temper tantrums anymore. And I think, because they're not being subjected to this crazy authoritarian nonsense that they subject all these children to. And what do you think about that, Meredith?
I love that. I've heard of a lot of families that are going a different direction now. They're starting their own schools. They're creating pods. They're getting the kids out of these government indoctrination camps, not just for everything that happened with COVID and the masking and not prioritizing the well-being of children, but also all of the Marxist indoctrination that's coming into the schools that they'd rather their kids not be exposed to. So I think it's great when parents can collaborate with other parents who are on the same page, who have similar values. And the only way you really find out who shares your values is by speaking the truth. When you speak about your values and what matters to you, you'll find out really quickly who are your allies and who are not. So that might be a way for some people if they're, considering wanting to take their kids out of school, but they don't want to do it alone or they can't, and they're looking to collaborate with other families and other parents. That would be a way to identify. It's amazing too. You mentioned kids, and do you remember the story of the 9-year-old girl in New York who tried to go into the Museum of Natural History? I think it was, and they arrested her. And now in New York City, they're acting like nothing happened. A friend of mine from Europe was just in New York last week, and she said, it's astonishing. You look around the city and it's like nothing happened. People are acting like it was a dream. It never took place. Like 9 months ago, maybe 10 months ago in New York, you couldn't even use a public restroom if you didn't have a vax pass. And now people are just acting like nothing happened. And that, to me, she said she walked into this museum and she thought about that girl, who got arrested because she didn't have, was it a mask or a vaccine? So, this is really dangerous when we look around and people are acting like nothing happened. You see the level of denial of what it was, and you see how quickly these people are going to jump right back into the next propaganda campaign because they've already been preconditioned for that, and there's this temporary perception that everything is okay, but it's clearly not. And that's why you can sense this sort of underlying anxiety in the air, because everybody kind of senses, they know something is off. But just like when you're in an abusive relationship, you want to go to the good. Your brain wants to think of the good. It wants to go back to the good times. In society, we talked about going back to normal. Everybody is dying to go back to normal. But it's like there's this big thing there that we haven't dealt with because we know it's not over. It's just a temporary perception of relief from the abuse.
Right. And I think it is the mind control program the CIA was doing. I think it's called Project Monarch, but they will traumatize you and try to, make you do what they want you to do. And then they'll give you a little break, right? They give you a little breather and then they do it again. And I think they call it the Stockholm syndrome or something, where you start to look at them as like almost like they're the good guy, because they have control over whether they're going to torture you or not. And it's very strange, but right. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying there, and it is not over, because they're still, creating more of these so-called vaccines that are. I don't know if anybody has escaped the fact that so many people have died from these, and it's or been terribly injured, and almost everybody I know who's gotten it, they have like this cough, this like it's like a chronic cough. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but there's so many different ways where you can help people heal from this. But I think there's been so many deaths that even the people have been really bought into the propaganda. Even they are starting to question some of these things. And I don't know if you've been watching, and I just hope our listeners have been watching The Truth About Cancer's new documentary. It's a 9-part series called Propaganda Exposed, Uncensored, and it's on the censorship. And it talks and shows a lot of factual footage on, how all of this came about, why we're in the situation we're in, how they've been propagandizing the television and media since like the 1930s, and they're showing some of these old commercials. Like, I'm 68, so I've been around a while, and the fluoride, the whole thing about the fluoride in your water and how it's just toxic waste they dump in your water, but it dumbs you down. It causes brain damage. They used it in the Nazi camps to make the prisoners less reactive and to make them more controllable. And here they've been dumping this in our water for many years. I've spoken out about it in Dallas and different places, and no matter what we did, the city council will still vote to dump this toxic poison in your water. And it's like, they got brainwashed into this. And so I hope everybody's watching that series, because it's very good, and it can really help if you can share it with someone who's not totally aware of what's going on. It documents how we have gotten to where we are. And so, Meredith, as we come up on the holidays and people are feeling, should I get together with this family group, or what happens if they're like shedding, and do I want to be around them? And how would you approach or give some tips on how to handle different gatherings that you might be going to in the next few months, and how to handle some of these different challenging situations?
So these are going to be like a case by case basis. It's going to depend who's involved, what's involved. Like, is there the shedding aspect, or is it just the way that these people were advocating for you being a second-class citizen a few months ago and, have your rights removed, and now they want to sit at the table with you as if nothing happened? Has there been any real reconciliation? You probably saw that article in The Atlantic a couple weeks ago about the pandemic amnesty, and they just want to sweep everything under the rug, act like nothing happened, erase all of the abuse, the genocide, everything that's happened. Why? When an abuser doesn't take responsibility for their actions, or their enablers, by the way, all these people in society that did the bidding of the abusers are enablers. When they can't admit the responsibility of what they've done, it means they don't think they did anything wrong, and they're going to do it again. So I think it's really important to consider, when you're considering case by case, if you're going to hang out with these people, this group of people, where were they over the last couple years? What was that dialogue like? What was that relationship like? Did you end up having to take some distance and space from them? Did they ostracize you and shut you out because you didn't take the shots? Are you now concerned about your health? Because a lot of people are having very real health problems just being in the vicinity of these people, even if you're not having physical contact. And, you know, if you have to get to the point where you have to choose between your self-worth and a relationship, whether that's a close, you know, friend that you've had for decades or a family member, there's only one sane answer to that question. And you have to stand by your self-worth. You can make the other choice. You can choose to go, you know, and reconcile that relationship and be around that person and sit at the table and listen to them continue to talk badly about you. Or maybe they don't feel as strong right now because that's not being pushed in the media. So maybe it's just all these little underhanded digs. And you're thinking, okay, I'm tough, I can handle it, I'll go to the dinner. But then you go home and your brain is just ruminating and ruminating over all the things that they said, over you're having these arguments in your mind about what you wish you would have said to them. And you realize how exhausting this is, how stressful this is, how taxing this is on your health and sanity. So you really got to evaluate if that's something that you want to do, if those are people that you want to be around, or if you would rather create your own holiday traditions. And I know that's really tough because holidays have this sort of big nostalgic energy around them, all this emotion. And like, we have this fantasy of like the 1950s Christmases kind of things and Thanksgivings. And you want everything to be this perfect family picture, which a lot of times is just an illusion.
Right.
And so sometimes we have to look at, okay, what do I really want? You know, maybe I want peace more than sitting at the table and feeling like that and feeling like I'm lesser than and feeling like I don't belong and feeling like I can't relate to these people because we do not share the same values. And when you're hanging out with somebody who doesn't share the same values, that's going to lead to inevitable betrayal. You may both feel betrayed by that because you don't share the same values. So if you both act in accordance to your values, you're going to betray each other. You're going to feel betrayed. And, you know, what is that going to do to your mental and physical health? So I think case by case, and if you're not really sure, sometimes it's better to take some distance and space because that gives you new perspective about the relationship. And maybe you start to get some insights. Maybe if you're in daily contact with this person, you don't have enough space to really reflect. That's why abusers are often always texting and calling, and they want you all the time there. So you're in it and you're just used to that anxiety and you don't even notice it because your brain gets so desensitized to that. But then when you take some space and distance, you suddenly get a very new perspective.
I love that. I love that you said take some space. And I think that is actually such great advice. And I've moved out into the country and I did not even know a single soul when I moved out here. And I just knew I needed to get out in the country. And I've met people here who I've become good friends with. And what I've noticed and what some people have put together are kind of like potluck dinners that happen a couple of times a week. And whoever wants to show up, shows up. And sometimes it's 4 people and sometimes it's 30 people. But I have really started embracing those. And I would suggest for any of y'all listening, if you are in a situation where you don't have a lot of close people that you want to celebrate occasions with or do things with, you might consider inviting some local people over that you have connected with, or maybe even go volunteer somewhere and see if you meet anybody that has a similar interest like you do, like, you know, volunteering at an animal shelter or, you know, a lighthouse for the blind, or, you know, I've volunteered at so many different places like that. And I am always amazed at how many people I meet there that have similar hearts and kind of a soul connection. And you really never know where you're going to meet these folks. And then, you know, have things that are not technology with you, you know, do some games or, you know, dominoes or play cards, something that's just kind of like meditation in a way, don't you think?
I love that, the real human connection. Personally, I like to go to cigar lounges it really lends itself to conversation. And so sometimes I'll meet some people there and I always bring up something about what's happening in the world. I'm usually the only one who's initiating the conversation. Every now and then I'll see somebody with like a blank face and I'll realize, okay, that's like a stop sign. But sometimes and often what I'll find is that people just immediately latch on and they want to talk about it and they want to like actually have a conversation about real life and what's going on. And I've made some friends that way. I've met some new connections. So I think it's really important, like you said, get off the technology, get into real person in life connections, because there's this thing called neuroception where our nervous systems are talking to each other, like electrically, when we're in person. And, you know, we get a benefit online. We're having this conversation. We can hear great conversations online, but it's not the same effect as in person when you get to connect with someone that you feel safe with, because that social bonding is such an important part of our mammalian brain so that we feel safe. And what you'll see is if you've been isolated for a long period of time and you just haven't felt like you've been able to talk to people, and suddenly you have this opportunity to talk to people, you go home that night and you feel a little bit lighter and you sleep better and you wake up feeling more relaxed the next day because there's a real healing benefit. Our systems seek homeostasis through that connection.
I love that. And our etheric field is also goes out. I think the Heart Math Institute measured it at 10 feet, but I think it even goes farther. But when we get together, we absorb each other's energy, and that's why we're so powerful together. And that's why they were trying to separate us all out. And I think somebody kidded me and they said, and I think it was actually true, but if you go to a satanic worship service or something, that you'd put on a mask and stand 6 feet apart. And so what they are trying to do is keep us from connecting and building up that energy, because, you know, it's like when you're in a choir or something and you have this wonderful uplifting energy. That's why they didn't want us, you know, singing in the church and, you know, all of this, you know, just really, I think, abusive types of things that they were, you know, recommending that had absolutely no basis in reality. Right. And you know, I'm kind of a renegade all my whole life. So it's like somebody tells me to do this way, I'm probably going to do the opposite. So I've been, you know, very, very much, you know, tackling that. But, you know, like what you were saying, it's interesting. And we go to the blacksmith shop every Friday night for a potluck dinner, and the blacksmith cooks some dinner and everybody brings, you know, a dish. And I've been meeting all these young families there that, you know, I would not normally meet it in kind of my everyday life because I'm out in the country, right? And I was talking to this one lady who's, you know, a mother of 4 kids and kind of new to the area. And she just kept looking at me and going, because I speak my truth. I don't go pretend anything. And she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm actually talking to somebody who is thinking like I am. And she was so refreshed. And now we've become really good friends. But, you know, different situations, I just push through that fear of the unknown, and I just go join a group, or I go to the potluck dinner, whether I know anybody or not. And I'm just been so happy to find that there are a lot of people there just like me who go there and don't know anybody. And we can just start talking and really connecting on a human level, like what you're saying, you know, that real heart to heart kind of connection. And I think this is more important today than ever, because, you know, we need to connect with the person at the grocery store who's checking us out, or the gentleman who comes and fixes your plumbing or your electricity. And, you know, I've made sure I've become really good friends with, like, the people that I take my trash to, you know, people that are a part of my everyday life that, you know, we need to be a part of, and we need to be present. And, you know, one of the things I've been focusing on, Meredith, is trying not to worry about the past or beat myself up over it. And, you know, I like to tell myself I did my best at that time, and not be so concerned about the future, because if you're not present I feel like we're missing out on actually living. What are your thoughts on that kind of projection or look at approaching life?
Yeah, I think it's important not to get pulled into that fear. You know, there's so much fear propaganda, so we can have a lot of anxiety about the future. And while some of those fears might be very real, and there's probably some things we should do to prepare ourselves for unforeseen things that could happen, like storing food and water and supplies and some things like that, and connecting with community so that we have people to help each other out if something crazy should happen. But at the same time, like you said, also being present. And so, you know, I love sitting outside on my patio. If you go deeper into nature, that's great too. But I like to sit on my patio with a little bit of nature around me and just be present, not be on my phone, not be listening to anything, not be doing anything else, but just sitting there, feeling myself, noticing what's coming up in me, noticing what's around me, maybe some little animals, maybe some critters that are coming to visit, but being really present in the moment. Because we get so distracted and the trauma really fragments us. Part of us gets stuck in the past. Part of our mind gets stuck in the past. And we become disconnected from all of that stuff, all of our feelings, like these actual parts of our soul that get fragmented off. And then we can't be really present. And then we're not prepared for whatever may come in the future. So I think it's really important to practice that presence. And like I said, in nature is the best place to do that because you're away from all the distractions inside your house and your devices. And when you're in nature, you just feel more connected to everything and you notice what's happening in the moment.
Yes, I love that. And you get grounded and really connect with the earth's resonance. And I think part of what we've been dealing with, and especially recently, I believe the electromagnetic field in our atmosphere has been particularly high lately, and we're harmonic beings, and when we connect with the earth and that Schumann resonance, we have this harmonic energy, whereas all these electromagnetic field devices like the computer, like the cell phone towers, things like that, those are a chaotic energy that actually traumatizes our harmonic beingness. And I think that's part of what causes disease and some trauma. And you know, I think also these things that we inhale, like oxygen and hydrogen and iodine and things like that, those have a harmony to them, and they complement our health and really help us. And these chaotic energies, I believe, really throw that off. And cancer, for instance, in my opinion, is actually cell miscommunication. So I do believe it's all about communicating in harmony and staying in that love spot. And you know, and it's like the lady with the mask on. I didn't approach her in a mean way and say, "Oh, you know, you shouldn't be wearing that. Aren't you worried about irreversible brain damage or anything?" I didn't want to do that. I just said, I think you look really scary in that. And for some reason it got to her. So, you know, so much of it is your approach. Don't you think, Meredith?
Yeah, that's everything. Because maybe the person isn't going to be receptive at all. That's not your fault. But if you approach in a way that maybe can connect to them, then it offers them that opportunity to reconsider what they're doing or why they're doing it.
Yes, yes. Well, and it's coming on Christmas, and I'm a crafty kind of girl. So I've been making, and I talked about this on my show a week ago, I've been making these organic peppermint nasal inhalers. And they're really very inexpensive to make. You just soak the cotton in here in, you know, like organic peppermint oil. And you order these little devices online. And I just printed off a little thing that says, "Joy to you," a peppermint oil inhaler, which kind of goes with, you know, a Christmas theme. And I've gotten to where I carry these with me and I pass them out to people that need a lift. And when you breathe them in, it really stimulates your brain. It makes you feel like, happy. And so, I'm thinking, Christmas is sometimes, something that is just made by you that could be very inexpensive, but yet can be something that can help someone be uplifted. Do you have any little suggestions for people on, what can you do to like bring in that joy wherever you are? Because I think that's what we all need today. We need to input our lives with joy.
I think hugs are great for that too. It doesn't cost anything to give somebody a hug, and it's so healing to have that contact, that physical connection with people, especially after all the deprivation and the social distancing and the fear and everything we've been through in the recent years. Hopefully if you feel safe with someone, give them a hug, receive a hug, experience that.
I love that. And hugs actually have been studied extensively and found that they will cure people or help people get well or prevent illness. And I think one of them is actually, breathing problems. and uh, and I really support that idea. Meredith, we're getting close to the end of the show, and I would love for you to share your contact information with our listeners, and also maybe share any kind of event you might have coming up that you want to tell us about.
My website is innerintegration.com. That's where you'll find my courses on healing from narcissistic abuse and clips from my recent interviews talking about the narcissistic abuse on the societal level. I also offer sessions, and you can find out about all my recent publications, including Substack and the Rumble channel that I started.
Thank you so much. And y'all, I highly recommend going to her website, and her information is fantastic. And I think, if you've been in any kind of these situations or people who have been, it's a great resource. And it's something that I think is so vitally important today in today's world. So we just have a few minutes, and I would love for you to share some parting thoughts, uplifting thoughts on maybe some action steps some people can do today to just help themselves and their families be healthier and happier.
I would suggest taking an inventory of your values. I would write them down. I would take a paper and just write down for 5 to 10 minutes anything that comes to mind about what matters to you, what's important to you. Step away for a few minutes, then come back and circle the top 5, the most important things on that list. Those are probably your core values. That's what you want to protect with your boundaries, to set new standards to protect these things so that you can also be taking actions that are in integrity with what most matters to you, so you can relift your self-worth. It's so important to restore your self-worth after everything that we've been through. And so it's also a preventative from more abuse, like an immunity from more abuse that will be coming down the road.
Oh, thank you so much. Your information is just, I feel very healing and calming, and it's so important in today's world. And I don't think people realize how many narcissistic people are out there and how toxic some of these relationships are. But if you're feeling stressed or strained or really traumatized after certain conversations with people, or have friends that you never really feel comfortable and happy with when you get off the phone or leave that meeting, you might want to rethink that relationship and how important it is for you in your life, and how to really support your own mental health. And sometimes we just have to remove ourselves from toxic relationships in order to heal and be healthy. And do you have any things that you recommend? Like I always think that magnesium is a really good helper, like a magnesium foot bath or something like that can help, like take the edge off and also help reduce anxiety, things like that. Do you have anything that you particularly like to do that helps in
I
those
love those
situations?
baths too, the salt baths with Epsom salts and some essential oils, especially like you talked about that electromagnetic pollution as well. If you walk too close to those poles that are now in like residential areas and stuff, you can start to get brain sick. If you don't feel good, get into the bath with those salts and you'll see how like your whole polarity, everything restores itself. It's also great for detoxifying and for restoring some of those lost elements, the magnesium. When we get stressed, we lose that.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Meredith. We are so grateful for your brilliance and you sharing all of these wonderful suggestions with us. And I hope you'll join me again one day soon and share some more ideas with everyone.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'm Nancy Addison, your host, and my website's Organic Healthy Life. And I just believe that how we do anything is how we do everything. So as you go through your life and you connect with those around you, just remember to add that main ingredient. And that main ingredient is always love.